Welcome to the Hunt Backcountry podcast. This is episode number 401, and our guest is one of you, a listener of the show. Cameron joins us today to tell us about some of the struggles and success that he has had hunting deer in his home state of California. He tells a story of a hunt that came together successfully this past year, and some of the things that he's learned over the course of several years as he's hunted in California and specifically gotten into backpack style hunting. So if you, like me, don't have it on your radar or think you'll ever hunt deer in California, not a problem. There's still a lot to learn from Cameron's story and the knowledge that he shares today. As always, guys, if you have any questions for us or have a guest or topic suggestion, send an email to podcast@exomountaingear.com. We would love to hear from you. And if you're enjoying the show, it does help us tremendously if you leave a rating or review in whatever podcast app that you are using. If you don't mind, hit pause and do that right now. All right, let's go ahead and dive into this conversation with Cameron. Well, Cameron, welcome to the Hunt Backcountry podcast, man. I'm excited to have you today.
Hey, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you sent over some images and a story via email that was super cool. One, to skip ahead, I just loved one of the photos was like you with your son, which was awesome to see him out there with you. And I have to say, like in that photo, you yourself are sitting there glassing, and he is next to you. What little setup do you have him using? Is it real binos or just almost a toy? Because it looks tiny.
So they're real. We've had them for a long time, and they're kind of the Walmart special, just little observation binoculars. But he loves them because he sees me with my bino harness walking around. For a long time, I was running just the lightest possible little tiny slick tripod. And it's just not enough, right? So I upgraded to a carbon fiber tripod. And so that's his now. He shoots his Red Ryder off of it. And I promised him when he was able, we practice gun safety at home. And so he's learning all the gun safety rules with his Red Ryder. And I said, when you can cock that thing yourself, then you can come out hunting with me. And I was about to go out for a scouting trip. And he goes, Dad, come here. And we go into the backyard, and he had been practicing, and he showed me that he could cock his Red Ryder. So he said, I'm coming with you. And so loaded up his backpack, brought out his little binos. I don't know if you can tell in the photo, but it's a very custom mounting bracket there. I think it's a blue rubber band for asparagus. That's how we mounted it to his tripod.
Yeah. He
was loving life. It's really cool.
That's super cool, man. And how old is he?
Oh, he's 6, almost 7. He'll be 7 next month. And I have a 5-year-old daughter that's right about the same. They're both they spot for each other, plinking around in the backyard with BB guns.
Dude, super cool. Well, before we dive into the hunt, just so listeners have some context for who you are, where you're coming from, maybe a little bit of your hunting experience. What would you tell us about all
that? So my name's Cameron. I live in Central California. I work in education, and so I'm in a suit and tie most days, and dreaming about the woods most of the time as well. And so it's interesting. I listen to your podcast very, very often. I've learned a ton of things from that. But a lot of people don't realize how much public land opportunity there is in California. And so I've been hunting public land here for, 20 years probably. Mostly upland game. Started with dove and quail and chukar, things like that. I did a little bit of waterfowl. I'm not wonderful at it. And then I got into big game hunting. And really what I prefer is low odds areas where you're mostly hiking around and enjoying the wilderness. And every once in a while you get on something. And so I do deer and bear and get a couple wild boar each year. And we do predators. I actually shot a bobcat on the very last day of 2019. The last day it was legal to shoot a bobcat in California. So I have a big 23-pound bobcat mounted in my living room. But yeah, just a little bit of everything. I just love being out in the woods. Can't beat a day in the woods, exploring and hanging out with the family and harvesting something when you can.
I've talked with guys about hunting California and on public land in terms of big game, that has mostly been like deer and bear. As you said, like I think you mentioned low odds. One theme that I feel like has come up in the conversations I've had, and I don't have any personal experience hunting California, but low odds and also low density, and then sometimes pair that with um, I would say overlap between like hunters and just general recreation, like hikers, etc. Is that something that you kind of run into in the areas that you hunt in California, or is it a bit different where you hunt specifically?
Absolutely. And so it, I'm hunting over the counter area primarily. I put in for the draw every year, but the place that I hunt is about a 8% success rate. And there's a little bit of falsehood to that though, right? Because that's counting everyone who bought a tag that's driving the roads and is necessarily a road hunter. So where I like to be is kind of like what you guys like to do is out as far back as I can where I get away from the people. And honestly, what drove me to doing that is exactly what you're talking about. I wasn't seeing a whole lot of animals. I was seeing a whole lot more people than animals. I think the thing that actually pushed me over, I was up on a ridge one year for the rifle opener, and I'm looking through my binoculars and I see a glint over on the other side of the hill, and there is someone looking through their rifle scope at me. And because they saw movement, I went, you know what? I don't want to be around here if people are pointing their guns at other people, right? And so that's what kind of pushed me into the backcountry because I wasn't finding a whole lot of success with high hunting pressure. And then, yeah, you run into people riding motorcycles and hiking, and everyone's usually pretty friendly, but they can blow an area out pretty quick if you're near the trails and the roads.
You sent over a bunch of talking points that I'm excited to dive into, but we'll kind of center those or just like set some context with a hunt that you had this past fall for deer. Give us some context for what that was. And then one thing you said about this hunt that caught my interest was essentially, it just sounded like the way you described it, it was just kind of called a next level, for lack of a better term, hunt for you, just in terms of the approach of it, the logistics of it, the physicality of it, etc. So just again, kind of big picture, like what was it about this past fall in this specific hunt that really was kind of at that next level accomplishment for you?
Okay, so yeah, you're totally right now, and that's why I reached out because I think I said something along the lines of this in the email that I sent you, but this was a solo backcountry multi-day backpack hunt, and I found some success, and I actually one tripped everything out, right? And so that I have done, I think every one of those things. Mark, I think you're from Missouri. I go back and hunt with my sister in Missouri every year. I hunt whitetail on public land out there. And so had the opportunity to harvest a ton of animals and butcher tons and tons of deer out there. We've had some luck out here. Me and my best friend Lucius, he harvested a bear in the same area, I think 2015 or so. And so we've packed stuff out, but it's different when you're doing all of those things in tandem with being solo and being kind of ultralight backpack and all of those things together. There's a lot of points of potential failure, right? And so it's, I know Steve sometimes will say you pack your fears. It's hard to go, I'm out here all by myself and I don't have immediate help for anything. And so how do I make sure I have everything I need, but not so much stuff and not so much in my head that I can't be successful when I can't harvest an animal and get it out and be able to partake in that meat when I get home.
I love that. You said, numerous factors of things you had done prior on previous hunting experiences, but combining them all into one is what made this both more of a challenge, but also with the success, more of an accomplishment for you. And that's really cool to me because I can relate to that on many levels of, some hunts you go into and they're not, they have aspects of difficulty or challenge or something new or something different. And I appreciate that. And it's like putting another arrow in your quiver. Like this hunt had this unique aspect or this unique challenge, and I learned something from it in this way. And now that's something I have to take with me in the future. And you start to do that over the years and over different trips and different species and contexts and what have you. And then sometimes like all of that previous experience and lessons learned come together into kind of this culmination. When that happens, it's super, super cool. So I know where you're coming from with the describing your hunt from this year that way.
Right. And don't get me wrong, if you get an easy one every once in a while, it's nice too, but it
Sure.
means more. And I sent you a photo of the deer. It's a little forked horn. And over half of the deer taken in this zone are forked horns, right? So it's up on my wall next to a 140 class whitetail that I shot in Missouri. Like it's a big deal to me, right? It matters because of all of the components of that hunt and how good it felt to be able to do all of those things and make them tie together.
Let's start here then. So again, there's a bunch of talking points we can dive into. Let's start with this one. You dealt with heat. It obviously is California, so pretty mild climate in general. But what I don't know is you mentioned season dates, and this was a rifle hunt. When was this exactly?
So this was opener was September 24th, 2022. And I've been in the habit lately, if I'm going to backpack in, I'll go the morning of the day before the opener and just pack as far out as I can get. And I'm hoping that I wake up on opening morning and all the road hunters are pushing deer into my area because I'm so far out. But in the foothills is a little bit cooler, but I actually live in Bakersfield, California. And I mean, we get freezes all through the winter, and then we're in 112, 115 degrees through the summer. We have weeks where even night temps don't go under 90. So it can be hot around here in the summer.
Speaking of previous experiences and new learning and all that, was dealing with meat in the heat something you had previous experience with, or was this hunt maybe partially because it was solo, maybe because of how far you were away from the road, for example? But how was I know we're skipping way ahead to we have success, but let's start here on taking care of meat in the heat. What have you learned either previously or on this hunt in particular? And what are maybe some specific strategies that you used?
Okay, so it's not the first time we dealt with it, but I wasn't sure that I was going to be able to get it out in a timely manner. So that a lot of forethought went into this because I've been down in this area before, not quite down in the basin, more up on the ridges. And if we get something, we're able to get it back to the truck within a couple of hours. And we usually bone it all the way out, to be honest. We bone it all the way out and pack it to where we need it to go. And so I've had a little bit of experience with that. I always bring pre-chilled ice chest with 40 or 50 pounds of ice in the back in case of a successful hunt. And so I knew I had that at the truck, but for where I was going on this trip, I thought about, okay, if I get something and it's not absolute first thing in the morning, I need to get to a shady place. I need to be proficient with my butchering technique. And I decided on going gutless, and I've done gutless just a few times, but not solo and not where time would matter, And so I watched a handful of videos. I kind of did some visualization to make sure, okay, I'm going to do a dorsal cut. I'm going to start on one side. I'm going to get the hams off first, the whole rear quarter. I'm going to go up the back strap, and then I can take or leave a blown out front shoulder. And so I'll save that for last. I'll flip it and repeat, right? How do I want to prioritize knowing that the clock might run out on me while I'm trying to do that in real time? And so the temperature swing while I was down there, it got into the low 30s at night. And so I'd get some frost and condensation in the tent. And then on the day that I actually harvested this deer, it was above 80. I think it was 80, 82 or 83 when I actually shot him. And so I didn't get to take a whole lot of grip and grin photos. It was crunch time. And so I drug him into the shade and went with the plan. So dorsal cut, pulled out quarters. I didn't bone him out because it was so warm. I didn't want to expose more of the meat to the air and lose more meat. I thought I could keep it cool enough. And so I know that's kind of a gamble, right? You go, I would love to get it off the bone so I don't have bone rot because it's so hot. So I actually used my tripod, and it's definitely not rated for this, but I put my tripod all the way up, pulled off a quarter, put it in a bag, hung it up, and let some air start flowing as I'm working through that process. And felt it was in a good, cool, shady spot. I skinned out the head, pulled the bottom jaw, pulled the tongue out, got as much as I could off of the whole head, and I was ready to go. And so I was about maybe 3/4 of a mile from camp, but camp was not quite in the direction that I would be leaving. And so I made a game time decision to go, I'm going to skip camp for a second. It's going to get warm. I think the shot was 9:15 or so, and it's only going to get hotter till the middle of the day. I'm not going to make it out in the heat of the day. It's too hot to hike out on that south-facing slope. And so what I decided to do, and honestly, I think this was from Steve's recommendation on one of your podcasts, was you're going to get a drastic temperature drop if you can find some moving water that's in the shade. So I packed to a stream that I'm going to have to cross to climb out of this basin, and it felt much cooler. And so I tried to find a spot that was shady now, but also would be shady in a couple of hours. And I set up my tripod in the water, and I hung that meat maybe a foot off the water and just tried to let that cool breeze cool it off, separated everything out as much as I could. And I went back to camp. And so I waited until shot at 9:15 or something. I think I got back to that meet with my pack camped up, or my camp packed up, ready to go at, I don't know, 5:30 p.m. or something. So I let it sit. So I definitely came into that green patch, wondering if a bear or a mountain lion got to it before I had. But everything was clear. My only big hiccup was I didn't wrap the skull well enough with a game bag. And so there was a colony of meat bees already setting up shop inside the skull. So I had to fight them for my skull for a little while before I was able to pack up and head out.
Yeah, great stuff in there. I mean, just knowing that strategy ahead of time of exactly how you're going to break it down, and then knowing where to get it to cool it, having all that forethought is such an advantage when, as you said, like, time is of the essence. And when you don't have those plans, I think a lot of times and this can apply to much more than meat care, but the more you pre-plan anything, then when you feel the pressure, then it's just like a matter of executing the plan. You already have the plan, versus finding yourself in a situation where now you're feeling pressure, you're questioning decisions, you're undecisive, things like that. So great example.
100%. And what I love, like I said, I work in education, right? And so what I love about listening to experts like you on the podcast is I got to learn that from listening to someone who's probably screwed it up before and say, no, don't do it this way, do it this way. So I get the benefit of not wasting a harvest that it comes very hard in California, because someone else has done that before and was willing to share their experience and some of their troubles. And it's just a cool thing to not have to learn everything on your own, right? Being able to go, okay, there's a lot of unknowns, and I there's many to deal with, but there's a few that I can trust experts that they did it this way, and I'm gonna model that and see if it works for me, right? So I'm leaning into the success already, even not having had to do that in the past. I think that's cool.
So you get to meet in the creek, you go back to camp. At what point did you pack up camp, get to the meet, and like actually do your hike out?
So it's funny. It's embarrassing to say, but I got back to camp and I'm going, man, that pack was heavy just with the meat in it. And I'm looking at my camp, and I have made some wonderful decisions based on your recommendations to lighten up my camp setup. But I had that thought in the back of my head going, do I really need to bring all the food that I have out with me? Do I really need this tent? Can this tent stay out? I'm thinking about what I can leave, but I know I'm not going to come back anytime soon, and I don't want to litter and leave this stuff down there. And so I packed up camp. I sat in the shade. I'll probably say this again, but the biggest pro tip I think I've ever heard from you and Steve is those salt tabs. I don't really like the mixed stuff. I don't like the flavor of the electrolyte powders, and I cramp pretty good usually. I started doing those salt tabs exclusively maybe 2 years ago, and I've had zero issues at all. And so I get back to camp and I take some salt tabs in preparation for my hike out. I actually pulled out a Nalgene and did some, I'll say, mountain foam rolling. And so, like, hey, I'm going to need my legs out of here. And so, it did some breathing and tried to calm my nerves to go, all right, it's going to be a heavy pack out, and I'm only doing it once, and trying to visualize what that's going to look like on my way out. And so, I packed up camp and got back to the hanging meet at probably, like, I think 5 or 5:30, and then the stream that I had to cross where I was hanging the meat is right at the base of the climb. So it was a big flat rock. I set up my pack. I got all the meat on that there. It was tall enough that I could set up my pack and just put it right on my back from there. And I didn't take it off again until I got to the upper road. So I think I was hunting about 4,800 feet. And I was upwards of 6,300 up at the trail.
Okay. Did you consider, I know you talked about, like, do I need to pack all this out? And you talked about leaving some things behind potentially for a period of time, but did you consider doing just 2 trips in general, or was that not really on the table?
Yeah, it wasn't on the table for me because I don't think I could have done it. That is
just like physically the double miles.
Yeah, I in that moment I couldn't have done the double miles. So here was my plan B, right? My plan B was take everything, hike until you can't hike anymore, and then dump everything. Like, so if at the bare minimum, I have walked maybe a third of a mile, maybe a little bit farther from camp to where the meet was. And so getting it all, like, I'm already making progress. I got there. If I can get halfway up that climb and dump a bunch of stuff, then I might be able to double back to there. But I'm not going to start. The freshest I'll ever be is right that second. So I want to get everything as far as I can. And then I could have shuttled it a little bit if I needed to. I probably wouldn't have left it all the way. I probably would have moved everything 500 yards, came back and kind of leapfrogged the rest of it if I had to.
So how did the pack out go then? Do you have this, like, it sounds like a somewhat intimidating, pack out ahead of you with all this weight and camp and everything. As you said, you're solo and all that. How did it actually go?
So I maybe 4 years ago, and again, from advice from your podcast, I upgraded to a internal frame pack that's about 5 pounds. And so my pack was doing really good. I was feeling good about that. It wasn't feeling really heavy to start with. And I think the key for me, and every once in a while I'll bring a trekking pole. I hardly ever bring 2 trekking poles. And just hearing the repetition over and over of why that's been helpful to you guys, non-negotiable. So I brought both with me, and I was singing your guys' praises on the hike out, because it really makes a difference when, just even if you need to stop and, like, kind of static stretch a little bit, you don't have to sit down. You don't have to take your pack off. I was able to kind of lean in on my sticks and stretch my back out and stretch my legs out and keep moving. And I didn't have to take my pack off, which was huge. And so I just knew I was going to get to the top, and I'm really happy I decided on the timing, because it started to cool off. And I don't think I would have made it in the heat of the day. It was probably 90 degrees in the sun during the day. And so when I got to the meet was shaded, but the trail still had some sun on it. But as I started climbing, I don't think I was ever in the sun. It was kind of going over the horizon. So I got to the trail in the dark via headlamp. And I don't think I said this part, but I drove out when I went out to the spot. I drove till you couldn't drive anymore. Some down trees. I parked. I have an e-bike that'll do flatland pretty good. So I rode about 3 miles out on a dirt road that's blocked because of some trees. So I got to as far as I could go, dumped my e-bike, and then hiked in just about 2 miles to where I was at camp. And so, just like the pre-planning for taking care of the meet, a lot of things have to go right in reverse, right? And so I made that hike out, and I see my e-bike there, and I'm like, okay, I'm hoping the tires aren't flat. I'm hoping I have the key still. I'm hoping it turns on, and all that worked out. And then I had I had to ride the few miles back with 85 pounds on my back, nice and slow to get to the vehicle. And I remember, I think it's 11 o'clock at night at that point, and I'm sitting in front of the vehicle going, man, I hope I didn't leave the lights on or the door open or the dome line on or something, because I parked in the day, and I pressed the button on the remote and it went chirp, chirp, and I was like, oh, thank God. Like, this is amazing, right? I'm sure you've had the same experience. I think I had a Rockstar energy drink in the ice chest, and I cracked it open. And I'm like, how amazing is ice? I'm having a cold drink. This is like, you appreciate all the things that you take for granted because you just finished something that is difficult. So it's a lot of things have to go right, and that takes the pre-planning on the front end to not miss a step, right? Because like you said, if I didn't know that I would be proficient with the gutless method, I could have screwed that up and lost all that meat right that second. If I didn't plan how to get it to cooler weather, I could have got all the meat off, but lost it there. If I didn't plan on how I'm going to pack it out, there's just so many off ramps where you would have went, well, nothing else could have happened. I'm sorry, it didn't work again, right? But a lot of things have to go right in any successful hunt to make it worthwhile and to have success at the end, especially a backcountry hunt.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know we just focused very much on the end of the hunt, the success, the meat care, the pack out. To back up, one thing you mentioned already in this conversation about your strategy for kind of packing in before opening day, and then was also something that you mentioned in your email, was essentially how you have learned to use road hunting pressure to your advantage. So like, let's back way up and talk about that, whether that you also want to tie that into preseason scouting, or really just what you've learned about, and this can apply to different contexts. Let's obviously use your example, but when there's pressure, when there's lower animal densities, things like that, what have you learned, and like, what are some of the specific ways that you use that to your advantage?
Sure. So the first thing I'll say is, and again, advice from you on your show is, I use Onyx religiously, and I plot a lot of things that maybe aren't just animals, but sign or sheds or deadheads or things that I go, I feel like there's animals here. Or if I run into something, I didn't know there was water back here. So I'm doing a lot of that all the time. But the first thing I did is I look where all the road accesses are, and I try to find the spot farthest away from all of them, right? There's the joke, how far can you walk into the woods? Halfway, because then you'll be walking out. So I think sometimes people are a little overzealous and they go, I want to go so deep. Well, if you haven't checked, you may run into another campground or another road, and you're losing some of that efficiency. So the way that I found this place in the first place was doing that, going, hey, I want to look at road access. Where is the nastiest spot that no one wants to go? This is one of those places that I've had friends here and go, oh man, you shot a deer, you shot a bear there, or you and Lukai shot a bear. Where is it? And I'm like, where's your Onyx? I'll share this pin with you. You're probably not going to want to go down there, right? It's one of those places that is overlooked because it's difficult and it's not a fun trip. So that's the first part. And again, I learned that from you and some folks you've had on your show. The next thing is, when I start running into people, I don't just leave, right? Sometimes you go to a trailhead and you go, man, there's a bunch of trucks out here. What am I going to do? I'm just going to go somewhere else. I shot a public land turkey in this way a couple of years ago. First day hunting turkey ever. I had the kids up there and we were practicing turkey calls, and we heard a response. I went, oh, I didn't know there was a turkey down here. And so I showed up the night before, and I saw some folks parked there, actually a big group of folks parked there. And it didn't dissuade me from going in. I just went in really, really far. I went in 3 miles, kind of looped around the back. And the morning of the hunt, they're up and they're loud and they're coming in my direction. And so are the turkeys, right? And so I feel like you can use that mindset to use pressure to your advantage. I've seen it happen in real life just here recently. I think 2 years ago. It could have been when Lucius shot that bear. Maybe it was 3 years ago. Anyways, we were up on this ridge down in this basin, and I saw 4 deer passed by, but at a far distance, maybe 450. And I can't tell if any of those are legal. One of them was at least a spike buck, but I can't tell if he has a fork. And they kind of pass, and I go, man, they're going into the chaparral. I'm not going to be able to see them again. And probably 20 minutes goes by, and 2 dirt bikers come down the trail, and those deer all ran back at 80 yards right in front of me. None of them were legal, but that I'm like, see, that it's working. That is exactly what I'm hoping for. If we're on the far side of pressure, either we're not going to experience pressure and then we're just hunting normally, or if there is pressure coming from that side, we're going to get a small percentage of push in our direction. So it can't hurt us. It's only going to help us if pressure is coming from the opposite side. And we got in there quiet and playing the wind correctly. We're unnoticed.
Yeah. That's one thing not just in terms of pressure in general, but one thing I've come to force myself to do is I think many of us tend to, whether we're e-scouting or what have you, like look at country and we immediately go to things like, what's the efficient way to cover this country or to access this point or what have you. And sometimes that's perfectly fine. But clearly, if that's kind of what we see as a good plan, then that's probably what a lot of other people see as a good plan as well. And so I just have to sometimes force myself to allow myself to go through that, like, and look at, oh, this would be a good approach. This would be a good strategy. This would be a good spot. But then at the same time, come back to this with fresh eyes and just go, what did I just overlook? So I just made this plan and it makes sense for all these reasons. And here's why. But maybe that's what makes sense to everybody. Maybe that's what more people are doing. So if I look at the opposite of that, or if I shift my perspective a theoretical 180 degrees, like what am I overlooking and not just seen as like the default quote unquote good plan? And sometimes that's given me a really helpful perspective on finding little spots or areas that I just flat out would have otherwise overlooked.
I completely agree, Mark. Yeah, it's funny. I've had days like that where you read the books and you listen to the podcast and you go, well, when it's hot down here, we're going to find deer at 8,500 feet. And I have spent a week solo backpacking and not seen a deer to save my life. And I'm driving back home and it's 104 and I see a big 4-point buck laying under a tree. And I go, he's not reading the same book that I'm reading. He should be up on the now, right? And it's so yeah, they make liars out of you really easily, but a lot of that has to do with what you're saying about hunting pressure. It's if everyone is doing that, then it's not that advantageous, and you might have to change your approach to say, where is that little honey hole that it's overlooked? And oftentimes, in my experience, it's the thing that's farthest away or the roughest country. So my sister Melissa is a avid hunter in Missouri, and when I go see her, we've killed more public land big bucks that we should not even see because we hunt like Western hunters, right? We pass a bunch of people who are 100 yards or 200 yards from the parking lot, and they're sitting in a chair out in the field watching the edge. And there's a certain public land property that I think we've shot 15 or 20 bucks out of. And we go out 2 hours early. We walk all the way to the back of the property. We follow the fence line. We cross water. And you know what? They're there because no one wants to do that. They want to shoot that buck every 4 or 5 years from 100 yards from the parking lot, and we'll get one every year. We have to haul it 1.5 miles back in, but you're totally right. You have to go. Yes, that is the right habitat. They would love that, except for there's hunters in blaze orange every couple of 100 yards around this field. Can you still find success in that area? Of course you can, but you got to think of it differently, just like you described.
This is a shift, but one of the talking points you sent over really caught my attention. You said why great gear and going light is more important for the weekend warrior. So what did you mean by that? What are some examples from your personal experience of maybe some changes you've made, for example?
So the biggest one that I'll tell you, and it hurts me to buy expensive gear, right? This is just a hobby and the money's not worth it. And I know I like it, but I shouldn't spend it. I'm not in the field enough days a year. And my wife, Crystal's always really good. She goes, you're going to use it, get it. Like it will save you time while you're out there and make your time more efficient. So I used to not hunt with binoculars. I had a Walmart special and I went, why do people use these? It's not really helping me. I don't understand it. And I went on a whitetail hunt, and a good friend of mine, Ryan, let me borrow his Zeiss binoculars. And there was a buck at a long distance in the brush. I pulled up, I saw that he was legal, and I harvested it, right? So it went really quickly, and I didn't miss the opportunity. And so I got Crystal actually bought me a pair of Zeiss Terra EDs, the 10 by 42s. And I love those and I used them, but I've gone through a couple different rangefinders, and I had a couple of times where I'm like, I see it and then I pull out my rangefinder, but I can't range it right. And there's a bunch of stuff going on, and I am having a hard time getting my routine to where, how do I look through my binoculars, then my rangefinder, and then get on the rifle and take a shot, right? I'm missing opportunities that way. And so I listened to some different reviews, and I know Steve's talked about them and you've talked about them. And so I ended up getting the Swaro range-finding binoculars. And that has been an absolute game changer for me. The amount that I spent on those to upgrade has probably saved me that in just fuel alone, right? You going out and being able to very efficiently range something, dial, and shoot, and I'm shooting more wild hogs quicker and more efficiently. Things are happening a lot more often than they were without it, right? And so it's you're able to capitalize on opportunities that wouldn't have been before. There's been times where I see a legal buck and I go, you can't quite get into the groove and make it happen. And you go, okay, well, I saw one, and that's a good sign, but it wasn't an opportunity. With good gear, you're able to make those opportunities. And so that just huge. The range finding binoculars have been such a big help, such a big help. And so worth every penny for those. I recently upgraded actually for this hunt because I'm trying to go as light as I can. I've been shooting I think a $300 Big 5 Savage 30-06 for years and years and years and years. And I have shot all kinds of deer with that rifle. There's nothing wrong with that rifle at all. But I wanted something that was a little flatter shooting. If I couldn't get a solid range, I could kind of Kentucky windage and figure it out. And I also wanted something that was lighter to pack around, not 8, 9, 10 pounds. And so I went with a Christensen Arms Ridgeline FFT. I think scope and rings, and I put a Salmon River Solutions Arca plate on the bottom, and I think I'm at 7 pounds 3 ounces all set up, and that thing just shoulders quickly, and it's beautiful to carry around even if you're not shooting all the time, right? You forget it's on your pack. And so those were the two big ticket items, but not just the things that you're using there. Like I upgraded to a quilt, and I don't think I would have ever done that without talking to you guys or hearing from you guys, because there is comfort in a sleeping bag and a big tent and all those things. I remember listening to a podcast, and I think I forget which one, but Steve said, well, yeah, if you're hunting, I mean, you're not just there for backpacking, right? So it's not all about the accoutrement for that. If you're hunting, you want your sleep system, your tent and your pad and your bag to be under 5 pounds. And I paused and I walked into the garage and I pulled out my tent, and my Big Agnes 3-person tent was like 6.5 pounds. I was like, oh man, I blew my budget just with
the tent.
And then I was running the Big Agnes 15-degree encampment, and that's 3.5 pounds, and a ultralight pad. And so I have all this stuff. I'm carrying 12 pounds of gear just to sleep, right? And so being able to have the confidence to go, what do I actually need? I got the Nemo Siren quilt, and I think it's just over 1 pound. I got the Climate Ultralight insulated pad, and all of the conversations you guys have had about how the R rating works, and that was so helpful, because in my mind, before I go, well, I just need a heavier, bigger sleeping bag because I'm getting cold, when it was 100% the pad that I was using, right? And so I was able to learn that from you guys. But now with I have the Nemo Spike ultralight. I think it's just over a pound as well. So my sleeping bag, my pad, and my tent, I'm 4 pounds on the dot, right? And so I can take that anywhere. I can leave that in my pack. I can use that for day hunts in case I want. It's a game changer to get down to 4 pounds. And why that matters to me as the weekend warrior is I'm not doing this every single day. I think when I emailed you, Steve, I said, when I emailed you, Mark, I said, I know you and Steve talk about thousands of feet of vertical elevation gain. The 1,300 feet was plenty for me, right? And so I don't do this all the time. And so I want to add some efficiency with my gear, but I also want to add a little bit of grace for myself to say, I don't get a chance to do this all the time. And so getting good gear, I can trust it. I can trust it day in and day out. If I don't use it for 3 or 4 months, I know it's still going to be good. So yeah, there's a lot of value in my mind, even more so for someone who's using it all the time, because you might get a chance to bust something up and say, I love it, or I hate it, or I can get a different one because you're in the field more often. I need my stuff to work every single day. And so upgrading to the tripod that I got, just there's a lot of different things that I've chosen to upgrade based on recommendations. And it's been a complete game changer for me.
It's a great point when you actually have limited opportunity to get out and hunt, that actually creates the situation where it's more important that you have your gear dialed, because you don't have the opportunity to waste. Like, you don't have time. You don't have as many opportunities to go out and be like, oh, well, that didn't work, right? You run into issues when it's like you only have these small amount of days per year, and you're losing very important, valuable time. It also makes it harder when you don't have as much time in the field to then be able to like compare different options and test this and that and the other thing. So then you do have to like pair that with some good research and like make more informed, better decisions, hopefully from some source you can trust. Because again, those days are critical, and your opportunity to do a bunch of different testing and tinkering and experimenting is, very limited.
Yeah, I completely agree. Well, and what I think is important to note is it doesn't have to be expensive stuff. It just has to be the right tool for the job, right? And so
agreed.
I've heard you both say this on the podcast as well. Like I run Sitka gear. I love it. I've had it for 10 plus years, and that you just cannot break that stuff. I absolutely love it. I listened to your recent podcast with Sitka, and I'm thinking about getting a mid-layer like active insulation piece based on your recommendation. But I've never got the gloves. I go, $160 for gloves, and I've tried them on, and they're not that warm. And I always go back to the ragwool gloves that I like. That they're like mittens that they're fingerless, but then they flip over the top.
Yep.
And you can trash them and get them wet and throw them away and buy another pair for $6 or $7. And I've always preferred those. And it's nice as someone who doesn't get to do it all the time to hear Steve go, oh yeah, ragwool gloves are the way to go. There's times to have other insulated gloves, but like he probably likes them just as much as I do. And so that's reinforcing for someone who doesn't get to use it all the time. Same thing with, I have 2 of the Black Diamond spot headlamps, and I have one that has the single button and one that has the double button. And I like them both just fine, but I've heard you guys talk about the difference between knowing the commands with a single button to make it work right. And I go, oh, that's so funny. I have that same issue. But if you guys are using that headlamp, I'm using that same headlamp. I'm not going to go waste money on a way more expensive headlamp that I don't need, because people that are using it all the time are having success with that same thing. So again, it's not necessarily expensive upgrade stuff. It's just the right tool for the right job. This year, I also upgraded some boots, and I've been running some like Merrell Moabs for a long, long time. They just wear out really quickly. They're comfy. They're comfy on day one. Don't get me wrong. But I tore my ACL, and I needed something that I was having some issues with rehab. And so I needed something that gave me a little more structure for my feet. And I ended up with the Crispy Laponia 2s. And after often trying to find taller boots that are insulated and they're a couple of pounds a piece. And I feel like I'm walking in mud, and hearing you guys talk about like, I run trail runners out there, or I'm running ultralight shoes, or I'm running like, you don't need insulation. And here's why. I'm starting to see, or I finally saw this last year, like, yeah, maybe there's some truth to that. And I run those Crispies if it's freezing cold or if it's 110, and they feel the same for all of the reasons that I think you just recently talked about this, about sometimes the thinsulate makes you sweat, and then your sweat makes your feet cold and all that type of stuff, right? So there's, again, we're going back to just hearing it from the experts and going, I'm going to try that on for size and see if that works for me. And I've seen a lot of that in your podcast, hearing from people who been there, done that, bought the t-shirt, and have some amazing recommendations. Another one I think that you recommended is that DMT diafold sharpener. I keep that in my kill kit now, and I against your guys' recommendations, I do use a Havalon. I'm just super careful with it, and I understand the gravity now of how bad that could be in the backwoods, but I love it. But I'll use that sharpener to touch up the Havalon, so I don't have to switch blades in the field. That's been great. And I always know that even if I usually have a pocket knife on me as well, that I have some redundancy, but I'm not carrying a bunch of extra stuff, and I can sharpen whatever I need to sharpen with that. And it's been great, especially if I'm trying to cape something out or do some fine work with that.
Yeah, that's cool. It's interesting, just as you're talking about gear, and it doesn't have to be expensive and things like that, is anymore when I get a chance to talk with someone, and I don't necessarily mean this for the podcast, but talk with other hunters who I know are in the field a lot, who I respect, etc. A lot of times when it comes to gear, people want to like, oh, what's new? Like, what's your favorite piece of new gear? What have you? And my question tends to be these days realizing, what's your oldest piece of gear? Like, what are you still using that you were using, X years ago? Because that's the thing you've stuck with for a very good reason. And I'm much more interested in that than I am what's the coolest, flashiest thing that you tried new this year. Like, I want to know what you stuck with for a long time. And then the same thing, like on the point of it doesn't have to be expensive. And it made me think of you mentioning the gloves, is if I know someone, especially, quote unquote, in the industry, who has access to a lot of gear, whether that's for free or discounts or what have you, when I see them using something very inexpensive, I'm much more interested as well. Because again, this person probably has the opportunity to use the $160 gloves or get the $160 gloves, for cheaper or what have you. But if they're still using the $15 or $20 gloves just to make stuff up, there's a reason for it, right? And so that's just one thing to throw out there to listeners. It's like, the new stuff's fun and flashy, and I like to talk about it, and it's cool to see what technology's doing and everything else, but also look at just where's the longevity and where's the value, especially if it's, again, coming from someone who has an opportunity to use a lot of different things.
See, and I love that you're saying that, because it's when you get a chance to use some of that stuff. For instance, I absolutely love the Stoic wool underwear base layer, and then their Arctic wool like long johns, right? And I've had the same pair of long johns for 12 years or something, and some of my other gear has been updated, but people will go, why do you still use that stuff? I go, well, I'll stop using it when it stops working. This is exactly what I need, because if I happen to sweat through it and I'm hiking, I can wear that under my clothes, not have an issue. But also when it's cold, I don't feel the cold, right? So it's almost like you have to take yourself away from, like you said, what's the new cool thing, and go, do I have a need in that area, or is my need being met? If my need is being met in the base layer, I kind of want to know if there's something way better, but I don't have an issue with that. Why would I mess with that? That's a good thing. I'm going to keep it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're probably wasting, mental energy, time, and money to chase an improvement that you don't actually have a need for.
Exactly.
A topic that comes up a lot, you mentioned it again in the talking points, is staying in the game when you're not seeing animals. So with your experience hunting in lower population densities, just lower percentage of success areas, how do you do that?
So this was true on this hunt. And I don't think I've said this. I've been hunting this area for quite some time, but this basin infrequently. And so last year, in 2021, I had been scouting really good in this area. We went out for archery season and saw some big deer, but out of range. I didn't have enough days to come back to, and I go, oh, I am going to knock something down come rifle season. And so I went down and set a camera and in this area just to see what time they're passing through. And you have to go back down there and get it, right? It's not, I don't have a cell camera or anything, but I set a camera down there. And while I'm setting a camera with a buddy, I see a legal buck like 100 yards away. I'm like, okay, we're in the right spot. We're going to see some deer. We pull out of there, and I am planning on coming back, I think in a week and a half or 2 weeks when rifle season opens. And a few days before rifle season, we get a really, really, really big fire, which happens in California. So much, in fact, that this fire near my area, what the closure area touched the Northern Complex fire. So I called Fish and Game, and I called the state, and I said, I'm a public land hunter. Tell me where I can hunt within 100. There, nothing. Everything is closed. We set it out. I went and we went to a buddy's ranch and hunted coyotes 2 years ago on the deer opener instead. But everything was closed. And so all the way up until it snowed, and they get feet and feet and feet of snow there. And so the next spring, I show up there and hike down there to pull my camera, and there are legal bucks walking by that camera on daylight on opening day, right? And so you go, oh man, they were there, and we called it. We knew what was going on down there, but with the fire pressure, you don't know how much of that pushed animals. There's a lot of other factors, and so part of it is I have a few key memories or pieces of evidence that there are deer in that area. They're not going to be gone forever. They might not be where I think they're going to be, but they're going to be in that basin somewhere. They like that basin. So part of that is just knowing that even if I don't see them, they're there. Well, when I went in on the first day, I usually play the first day as conservative as possible. And so get up before the sun comes up. I don't cook anything in the morning, although I love me some coffee. I don't warm anything up. If I'm out there to hunt, I wake up before the sun comes up. I don't eat breakfast. I pack up and I get to where I want to be, and I wait until after that first morning rise to make coffee or eat kind of in my spot. So I got to kind of an overlooked spot where I've been before. I didn't see movement. I didn't see a living thing at all, right? Which is kind of discouraging when you know they've been in that area before. And it's easy to get distracted or to change your game plan or to pack up all. That's a good excuse to go home and see your family, right? Hey, I'm missing my kids. I'm missing my wife. Maybe this isn't the year I'm going to go home. I'm planning to be there for 5 days. But I didn't. I stuck it out. And midday, I slowly creeped into where I was expecting to see deer, looking for sign. And I confirmed that they're not moving through there at all. They're the normal pathways that I've seen them in the past. I don't see any tracks. I don't see any sign. They're not there. And I take that as a positive, because if you know they're in this tract of land, it's just as valuable, in my opinion, to know where they're not as to know where they are, right? So I go, perfect. I'm looking at Onyx and I go, forget this whole side, that they're not here. That helps me figure out where I'm going to be tomorrow. So I moved to a different spot for the evening. And I said, okay, I think I know a plan for the morning. The wind is going to be blowing from the northwest. And so I'm going to leave camp. I'm going to go around this pinnacle, take a big button hook, add maybe 3/4 of a mile to my hike. There's a cow trail down there, so I can be nice and quiet. I'm going to follow this cow trail up. I'm going to get to this rise, and I'm going to sit on this rise and check this other meadow that I've seen deer in before. Because if they're not here, they're either here or here, right? I'm kind of narrowing it down. And doing that for the first couple of days, you start to second guess yourself. You go, am I spooking everything? Am I wind bumping things and not knowing it? And it's really that self-talk to go, well, if you don't see them climbing out of the basin, they're probably still in here. I know there are deer in here, but I can't make any silly mistakes because I can't it can't be a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? To say, well, I don't think there's any deer, so I'm going to bump deer out of here. And then I knew it was this way and I'm going to leave, right? I'm happy to be out here. I want to be out here. So that next day is when I started coming around, and it's before the sun came up, and I see something kind of moving over on one side. And so I dump my pack and sit down kind of on a steep hill, and it's a doe. She's walking down what I now see to be a trail kind of off in the distance up against the chaparral, and she's got me pegged. And so I'm not moving. I'm just trying to confirm that it is a doe, and it is a doe before shoot light. And she keeps looking back. And so I'm looking at her going, okay, that's a doe. I'm not, they're not doing antlerless tags in California during this season. But she keeps looking back. And so I go, I feel like something's following her, or she's with a group. I wonder what's going on over here. So now I know that that's kind of the area that I want to be in, because she's giving me the signs that there's more to the story over here. And so I wait until she kind of moves off so I don't spook her. I get my gear back up and I start moving in that direction. And I don't think I went maybe 150 yards, and I busted 2 bucks from like 20 yards. They're just kind of in the briars next to me. They jump, they run across the cow trail, they climb the hill, and they're up behind an oak tree. And I dump my pack and get on my glass, and they're, I don't know, 130 yards away or so. And one is definitely legal. Now, barely. It's a little tiny forked horn, maybe a 2 or 3 inch spike on at least one side, but I know one of them is legal. So I get my rifle up and I'm trying to check, but they're kind of doing this funny leapfrog thing, and I can't confirm. Maybe they were both legal. I'm not sure, but I couldn't confirm which one I knew to be legal. And I'm wanting to make something happen, but it's not happening, right? I'm not going to force it. And so they kind of move on, and they're working their way up into the chaparral. And so I kind of stop and go, okay, like this isn't the time. They're not gone forever. There's at least one legal buck in here. I finally got some confirmation, right? After a couple of days of just not seeing anything at all, but slowly reducing my search pattern, right? Bringing it in as tight as I can. I know that they're going to be in this area, and I don't want to bust them out of here and then be somewhere where I had already kind of cleared as not being a viable option. So instead of giving chase, what I decided to do is keep with the plan I had before and go to that spot that I wanted to sit down and kind of watch over the top of this meadow. Now, Steve, I keep calling you Steve. I'm sorry. Mark, I've heard you and Steve kind of talk about when animals stand up and when they move, right? And this is something that I haven't heard you say exactly, but I think it's kind of in that realm, and I bet you've done this before. So it's a hot morning. What I did is I got behind some manzanita. There's shrubs down there. I'm up on this high point, and I back up all the way until my back is right at the line of the shade. Okay. And I know as the sun comes over the horizon that I have a big shady spot in front of me, but that shade is going to close in on me. And at some point I will be sitting in the sun again. Right. So there's this big shady gap, and I sat there glassing until the sun runs into me, because my thought is, if I push those deer and they lay down somewhere, they're going to lay in the shadiest spot they can. And at some point that sun is going to hit them and they're going to stand up. Well, it's almost like I'm setting my timer, right? I'm going to do the same thing they're doing. I know they just moved and laid down. So I sit on the edge. I wait until the sun touches me and I stand up. And when I stand up, I turn around and I'm glassing kind of in the area that they were. And I see that buck moving. He stood up the moment that I stood up, and he's at 265 yards or something. So I was able to range him 265 yards. And I've been doing this thing that I'm having a lot of success with Onyx, because now they do that radius tool. Have you used that radius tool before, Mark?
Yeah, I have.
Okay, so here's how I used it. I used it for this hunt and it was successful, but I've been using it in the last, I don't know, year or so pretty regularly. So I pull up my glass and I range him 265. I open up Onyx, I press that button where, like if you point your phone in that direction, it does the heading for you. Mm-hmm. So I do the heading towards it. I do a radius to 265. So I bring it out like that. And then I mark a spot. So I go, here's the radius of how far away it is. And I know that's going right there. Or the deer is right here. And he is headed in this heading. So then I make a line on the edge of that circle where I believe him to go. And I scroll over there and kind of look at the topography and I go, I think I can get in front of him. I know how far out. Even if he stays the same distance away from me, he's going to be at least this far away. So I backed off and I beat feet. I ran 700 yards over the hill, kind of around the back, and I tried to get as far in front of him as I could. And I ran up the side of the east side of the basin and tried to be where they're going, right? And so I got to a spot which was good for me, a tree cover and some good open ground. And I set up my tripod and get my gun on the tripod, and I'm ready if they come through. And maybe 2 or 3 minutes goes by. And have you ever had that feeling you go, this is a good setup to shoot only if they walk by, and I don't think they're going to walk by. So I got that feeling. I went, I don't think this is it. I think I need to move up, because maybe 50 yards ahead of me was a dry creek bed, bunch of rocks and kind of overgrown. And I went, I don't think they're going to cross that unless they have to. So maybe I need to get to that, and I might see them run into that barrier and either find a natural crossing point or kind of work their way down using that as a barrier. But I knew they were in the vicinity because I saw them earlier. And so I have my pack on but unclipped. I have my tripod extended to stand, and I'm carrying my tripod with my rifle attached to it, right? And I'm kind of working my way through chest high manzanita to get close to the riverbed. And I almost want to cross it and get on their side. Well, I get into it and I'm in the rocks, a bunch of river rocks, and I'm kind of up on a high side right there. And I get through the chest high stuff. I kind of get out into the clearing, and there's a deer at 80 yards with a big granite backstop, right? There's a big boulder behind it. And it's like broadside stopped, but sees me. And it's that doe from earlier. And so I open up my tripod because I already had it set up, and my height's already set. And so I get on the gun, and she sees me and looks back behind her again. And I go, she's doing that thing again where she's looking behind her. I think there's another deer. So she doesn't spook really, but she jumps off, crosses the riverbed, goes off to my right up into the chaparral. I can hear her moving, but I can't see her. She's gone. And so I go, okay, I think there's another deer, and it's going to follow that same exact path is my guess. Well, I see some movement, and there's that big granite face of a boulder. And then to the left of that boulder is a big, thick manzanita bush as tall as I am. And I see some antler tips on the other side of that, and it's kind of moving around. And the mule deer here have real chocolate antlers, and so it's not like that stark white like in the whitetail woods, right? So I see something, and I go, it looks like branches, but I think those are antlers. I get on my glass, and 100%, that is a legal buck. I can tell it's the only deer there, but all of its vitals are completely covered. I can see maybe it's half of its eyes and its antlers. And it kind of knows something's over here because the doe it was walking with had already spooked off. So I see my opportunity there to say, I got about 2 steps. It's probably not going to give me a big shot opportunity. What it's probably going to do is when it feels like it needs to leave, it's going to run that same path that doe did. But I got to see the doe go through there, so I have an idea of how that deer will pass that rock face, right? So I get on the gun, and Mark, I'm not joking with you. I was on the gun for 6 minutes, right? Just dumping sweat out in the sun, standing on the tripod, waiting for it. And that thing thought about it and gave me ear twitches and moved back and forth. And it started to run. When it went off, it went step, and it's like it stepped on a landmine. I'm shooting a 6.5, 80 yards, and I've been shooting that gun religiously. And it's like an extension of my arm, and that thing stepped out, and it just felt perfect. Got the good reverb, and it sounded like a good hit. It felt like a good hit, and it finished its way across the riverbed was gone. I didn't see it. So I know it's probably taken that same path. And so what I did at that point, even though I'm amped, right? I'm getting the shakes because I'm excited. I'm out here in the middle of nowhere and just had a successful shot on a buck, and it's feeling great. I did the same thing. I pull out my Onyx. I take a heading and I range it. It's 84 yards or something like that. And I do the radius and I mark a point, because I know I can't go A to B to get to it when it's time. I'm going to have to go through the riverbed in a different direction. And sometimes you don't have those landmarks when you get close to it. You know that, right? And so I was able to use that. I walked down through the riverbed, came up the other side, get over to an area that looked way different from that side. I found a big rock face, and I just see blood splatter all in the right spots. And I start to see a blood trail. And I think that thing went maybe 40 yards, if that. It made it down the riverbed up the other side. And I was tracking blood so much that, they blend so well, that I was tracking blood, looking, and I see blood in this last spot. And I'm looking ahead and going, man, I don't see any blood. I think I lost it. And I kicked it. I actually physically ran into it. Instead of seeing blood there, it blends in so well. But without that kind of protocol that I took to make sure that I'm not only shooting something, but I have a repeatable way of tracking it and finding it to the best of my ability, I don't know if I would have found it even there. It's just thick chaparral and everything blends in. And so again, as a weekend warrior, I don't get to come back there and search. I need to find it right that second, or soon after. And the longer I'm looking for it, the more likely that the heat's going to take control. So
good stuff you shared in there. I'm sure that some listeners are definitely picking up some tips on just ways to use Onyx or think through, both approach to a shot opportunity as well as what ended up being a recovery as well. Man, this time has flown by. I keep wanting to dive into other stuff, but aside from any takeaways you want to add, we'll wrap it here. Again, there's some great topics we could dive into, but I know you're at work and we can't keep you all day. Is there anything, that you would want to make sure we hit or cover or share before we do wrap it up?
So yeah, just one quick thing. And that really is knowing your weapon system. And I'll be brief with this, but so I have a good friend named Ogden that we do a lot of training with. I can't speak highly enough of international tactical training seminars in LA. It's run by active duty LEPD SWAT. And I talk about high level instruction. The guy who taught my handgun class was SWAT Operator of the Year for their 50th anniversary. The guy who taught my sniper class was SWAT Sniper of the Year in the same year. And so just world-class instruction. But it's interesting how similar what they're doing in those long-range precision classes, how similar that is to what I've heard from Chris Way about riflecraft. And so I think if anyone's listening, if you have a hard time getting to a long range, or you don't get a chance to shoot your rifle as much as you would like, I have seen huge gains in my personal accuracy shooting the riflecraft. It's standing, kneeling, sitting, prone. And you rebuild your setup every single time, every single shot. You do 3 rounds of that. You're shooting at 100 yards. You're trying to get that group closer and closer. And in the times that I practiced that, I went from, 15 plus. I think I'm down to 8.33. And why I think that's important is you get to use your own setup, right? So you learn things about, hey, when I shoot standing from a tripod, I err to the right, or whatever the case may be. And so I don't use standard PRS equipment to do that. I'm shooting my hunting rifle off of my tripod, or whatever I'm using stuff or my pack. I'm using stuff that I would shoot in the field. So when you get that opportunity in the moment, in the back of your head, you're not second guessing. I don't know. I've never shot that far from a standing position before. Or I don't know what it's going to do here. Or what does the recoil feel like if I'm on one knee? You're able to practice that. And so I was doing the riflecraft based on recommendations from this podcast beforehand. Me and Ogden were, and going into advanced precision rifle with ITTS, I just smoked everybody because, and not because I'm a way better shot or anything. It's because I've been practicing that thing that is hard to practice, right? And so I feel like because of that, in the last year, I've shot wild boar on the run, shots that I feel ultra confident on now, being able to operationalize that training, and that's not always the case. And so I just want to part with that and say that if people haven't dug into that, that has been such a huge help to practice in a way in my limited time in my home range that I'm able to shoot out here locally, to do something that has strong positive effects for your few days in the field that you get.
Awesome. Great stuff, man. So much good in here, Cameron. I appreciate you reaching out to share not only the hunt story, but just breaking down some really helpful lessons. It's so good for me to have, the opportunity to speak with the experts and all of that. But a lot of times it's good to know, because I still consider myself like one of you, like just regular hunter, but it's good to know, like, especially for someone like yourself who's listened to the podcast, who's gone through, this hunting journey, like what sticks and what has made a difference and all that. And you've really helped highlight some of that today. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you for what you're doing. And again, you have saved me so much time and money and added confidence to my hunting skills that I just can't thank you enough for. And so I appreciate you responding when I reached out, but it all comes from a place of great gratitude, because my family is eating well based on your thoughtful recommendations, and I just think you do such a good job of pulling out the things that are the most advantageous for folks like me who are trying to make it work when they can. So thank you.
Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that conversation as I did. And Cameron, thank you for joining us and sharing the story and experience with us. Listeners, if you have something to share, whether that's a question, a topic suggestion, a guest suggestion, or maybe a story of your own, send an email to podcast@exomountaingear.com. You can also look for the link in the show description of this episode that says leave us a message, and you can leave us an audio message on whatever device you are using, and we will answer that on a future Monday Minute episode. Finally, if you haven't yet, be sure to hit subscribe or follow in your podcast app so that you receive future episodes automatically, and we'll talk to you soon.